You've built a portfolio of over, how much is it?
Circa 15 to 16 mil. The goal was always to get to 100 rooms, and we'll get to that this year.
How does that number feel to you?
Surreal. I mean, I remember when I was probably early 20s, wrote the cheque out, the first £1 million cheque, put it on my fridge, which I looked at every day, and always wanted to get the portfolio to £1 million. And now, the deals that we're doing, we can fold in one property, and that can be over £1 million, just in the process of doing a commercial to residential conversion, and that's going to be worth 1.4.
From that family home, maybe it's not in the best condition, to getting it to an all singing, all dancing luxury HMO. What do we start with first? We are back, another episode of the PBK podcast. Each and every week, we bring you an amazing guest to talk all things property. Today, I have Mitch. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Good. Now, look, we had to get you on. We spoke to our mutual friend Omar, and I said, look, who should I get on the pod next? Like, you've done 100 episodes. You want to get some nice guests on. You recommended you, and a couple of people have also been asking you. To be fair, for about 6 months, your name's been coming up.
Good.
And we connected.
It's good to know.
And I said, who's that guy with a fancy car? Becky, who's that guy who posts a lot of Lamborghinis? He's someone I should maybe talk to. Yeah. So you specialise in high-end HMOs. You've built a portfolio of over, how much is it? Approximately, I see your headline number.
Funny enough, on the way here, someone just phoned me, the solicitor phoned me to say we just completed on another one. So I think, obviously, we've got stuff in construction, but it's circa 15 to 16 mil.
Circa 15 to 16 million. Yeah. And I think one thing about that property is you very quickly get to some huge numbers, some fancy numbers, particularly when you're operating in London and surrounding counties. How does that number feel to you?
Surreal. I mean, I remember when I was probably early 20s, probably watched The Secret, wrote the cheque out, the first £1 million cheque, put it on my fridge, which I looked at every day, and always wanted to get the portfolio to £1 million. And now, the deals that we're doing, we can, fold in one property, and that can be over £1 million. Just in the process of doing a commercial to residential conversion. It's just had planning approved to convert the upper parts to 12-bed HMO, retain the commercial on the ground floor, and that's going to be worth like 1.4, alone. So, as you say, it can be big numbers, and I think as well, we are starting to build out a wider team now. But you can have big numbers, and you can look around and you think, like, it's only me. So it's a little bit surreal because I've had trading businesses before, and obviously you need lots of staff. So it's it always feels a bit surreal.
It's funny, I speak to a lot of developers, and that's a real common theme, that it almost doesn't feel like a business for a long time. Like, you're like, okay, I buy one, I do one, but you feel like a landlord rather than a business owner.
Yeah.
At what point did you really start to feel that transition?
So, I mean, I've been investing in property for about 13 years now. Just started buying like apartments down in Portsmouth. And I was acquiring them from a developer down there that was doing like commercial to residential conversions. So I was picking them up, doing some deals off plan, getting some gifted deposits, and obviously built the portfolio that way. But I mean, I would say, I've never been the landlord in terms of being hands-on, go into, repressurize the boiler and all that sort of stuff. I've got a team for that. But it's interesting now because, as you said, we're focusing on the high-end HMOs. And the reason why I like HMOs is because, you can generate really good yield, but you can still operate as an investment company rather than a trading business. But what I'm now seeing is the more rooms we add, we're now starting to transition from from an investment company more to a trading business, because essentially we're selling a product. Yeah. So we're starting to bring in a lot of the operation in-house. So it's now feeling more like so it's a funny place. You've got this like investment business where you can sort of get to a certain amount on your own, but then, you can only go so far. Then you need to start leveraging other people, and that's it. And you slowly start to bring people on and sort of almost not realise that you brought this person on, or this person's kind of consulting for you. And before you know it, like, loads of them are full time. And then it's like you kind of look around one day and be like, oh, no, this is a company. This isn't like the almost one-man bandy that I started with, and it really grew. But let's kind of take things back a little bit further. So you spoke about like that, kind of having your check on the fridge of £1 million, and that's where you wanted to get to. How important do you think
you kind of like visualizing your long-term success has been?
Yeah, I mean, I just had a feeling inside that, you know, I would sort of do something from an early age. It's, yeah, I don't know. Is it sort of born into you from an early age, or is it something you pick up further down the line?
It's sort of like a question that a lot of people ask. A lot of people ask, like, you know, they know where they want to get to, whether it's they know they want to be worth X amount, they want to get this job, they want to do that. But it's how do you turn those, I guess, dreams into reality? And if you were talking to maybe your younger self or somebody else watching this, what would you say is something that people should do to help them achieve their goals?
I would definitely say, you know, stay curious, you know, ask lots of questions. You know, if you ask questions, generally you'll get to a result or find a solution. I think you've got to start young. You know, what did they say? Like, the best time to start was yesterday, second best time to start today. So I would say, you know, always be learning. I'd always say focus on long-term value as well, rather than like short-term wins.
Yeah.
You know, think that, you know, sort of have that long-term sort of vision. You know, make calculated you know, I suppose it's make calculated, you know, you don't want to blow yourself up, go back to zero. I know that's sort of like, I suppose it's like championed, isn't it, in the UK? It's like, oh yeah, you know, I lost everything and I come back, sort of thing. I mean, no one ever wants to go back to zero.
Yeah,
So,
like, I think it's understanding yourself. Like, I'm quite risk adverse, and I look at stuff, and some people fly and they do amazingly, and I think, oh, I wouldn't be able to sleep doing that.
No.
Like, and I think you got to understand that if you love living life on the edge, I've got friends that are always, you know, like a phone call away from bankruptcy. But that being said, they're on the ascendancy of potentially being worth hundreds of millions because they're willing to take the risk. But they understand that's what works for them.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think it's just understanding that risk and just, being calculated. Yeah, and just, you know, just taking action. You can talk about it all day long, but essentially if you don't take action,
I think
you're never going to move forward.
Really important. Understanding the difference between, yes, visualizing, yes, having a plan, but also at a certain point, like, you can't do it in front of your computer screen. You're going to have to get outside
got to take
into the world.
And it's never going to be the most perfect time, you know, and, you know, obviously I've never done any education. You know, all of my sort of knowledge has come through just on the job learning.
Yeah.
You just got to take the jump and just, you know, just put one foot in front of the other and just muddle your way through.
Yeah. So let's kind of talk about your journey, because I think when we talk about, you know, 15, 16, 70 million pound portfolio, for a lot of people that it almost sometimes it sounds so far away that people almost sometimes switch off because they're like, oh, that's not where I am yet. But I think it's always good to kind of take it back and see what your journey looked like, and it kind of can help other people. So what were you kind of like sort of as a young lad? Like, what were you like there? What was your first job?
Yeah, so funny enough, I put a post out the other day, which I don't know if you saw or not, but yeah, just like a normal upbringing. You know, got 3 siblings. We lived in, you know, 3-bed house, quite modest. I suppose if you want to, you know, on a deeper level, probably, I mean, we actually, you know, had a period in a women's refuge as kids, but, you know, didn't have, you know, loads of money around us, not from a wealthy family. You know, mum and dad went entrepreneurial, didn't have a family business. But I just still knew that I would, you know, create something from life. Just went to a normal school, got a few different GCSEs in terms of, I think I put my grades up. I can't actually remember what they were now, but a couple of C's, D's, E's and an F. So not great, but I just went straight out to work. I just wanted to get out to work and just start earning some money.
Where'd you start?
So I got a job as a locksmith.
Okay.
Because I went to the...
that's where all the money came from then.
Yeah.
Listen,
I've just been robbing banks.
No, Locksmith the other day to just like, I think one of the admins booked a Locksmith.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't an emergency.
Yeah.
It was just someone was like, oh, their lock's dodgy.
Yeah.
£330 for a Yale lock from Screwfix.
It's actually not a bad trade.
Yeah,
so when I was 16, left school, went straight to the job centre because I just said, I just want to do sales. And they said, well, look, why don't you work at this local locksmith company? You could learn a trade, but then also they've got like a showroom of safes and locks and bits. You can do a bit of sales. So I said, oh, that makes sense. Literally fast forward 3 or 4 years, become like a master locksmith, fully qualified master locksmith. Went out on my own. So this must be like 22, 23. Went out on my own, got a little transit van, went around doing lock jobs, around Essex, sort of East London. And yeah, just progressed from there. I then folded that in. I met a contact who was my first business partner, Neil, and he was a commercial agent at Kemsley. And I think the recession hit and he went, look, this commercial game's finished for the next 5 years. I'm going to go off and create a security maintenance company called Securo. He said, look, if you want in, fold your locksmith business into that and then we'll just try and create something. So that was 2012. Fast forward probably.
Couple questions about that. In terms of going from the safety net of getting paid, working for a company, to go in to do your own thing. And I think that's where we talk about that, had it in you.
Yeah.
Like, were you not scared being sort of like young teenager, early 20s, to go on your own and move away from the steady income?
Do you know what? It's the earlier you do it, the easier it is. I know responsibilities. Yeah. So when I made that jump, I wasn't even on the ladder that did a property. I lived at home with my mum. So I had no responsibility. Yeah. Literally, I just, I could make that transition, went on my own. And then, I must have been, like I say, early 20s then. And I've just worked for myself ever since. Yeah. So that transition was easy. Obviously, as you get older, as soon as you've, got a partner, you start having kids, you get a mortgage, it all becomes a little bit more difficult. So
you'd say like doing it earlier on when you don't have that risk element, it almost helps to balance it a little bit. Because if it goes wrong, you can still go back to work. You haven't got to pay bills every month, and if you're in that position, it makes it a little bit safer. The other question I had is, obviously you've now got this business. You're charging idiots like me £300 to change a lock. But then you still saw the value in partnering up with somebody. Sometimes was there not an ego thing of, oh no, I want to do it by myself? Why did you see the value in having a partner?
Yeah, so the company was called Locksmith Local Limited. I think my 2010 account showed like 50 grand a turnover. I think my net profit was like 15 grand. Yeah, which is crazy now when you think back. But what I recognised was Neil, who was well connected in that commercial agency world, and he started to pick up some quite large contracts in terms of like man guarding for like commercial units, etc. And I sort of saw the opportunity there.
And that's like on like monitored security basically for like vacant commercial units.
Yeah, so right? I mean, it's obviously like man security, man and a dog, but the company sort of progressed, and we actually niched down into like construction site security. So we were working with Bellway, Taylor Wimpey, Red Row, and we had a really good model whereby we used to buy the equipment in, like the cameras. We used to install it on site, and basically we used to lease it back to like the house builder. So everything was recurring revenue. So we had roughly about 200 sites across the UK. Oh, wow. Yeah, each site was probably turning over, 250 to 300 grand a month of recurring revenue. Obviously, you needed 25 staff to oversee that operation, but it was like a recurring revenue business, and obviously that become quite valuable then when we sold it in 2021. So,
okay, amazing. And then with that, when did you actually start buying property again in Portsmouth, and why Portsmouth?
Again, just through that contact. So I bought my first residential house in 2009. That was actually my family house. So I was looking at a flat, and Mum said, well, I've seen a house down the road that I quite like. Why don't you try and buy this? So we did a deal. I bought the family house. That was the 3-bed house in 2009. Bought my first property in 2012. Again, just went down there. It was coming off the back of the recession, and obviously lenders were still really nervous about property in general. So I had this contact which I made. They've just developed, it was like 26 flats or something, commercial to residential. And they said to me, well, look, we'll give it to you cheap, these flats, because obviously if we get the first lender in the door, all the other lenders will be comfortable, and then we'll be able to sell the rest of the plot. So yeah, I just started to pick up some really cheap apartments. I think it was between 2012 and about 2016. I think I managed to buy 18 apartments down there.
Oh, wow.
From these guys. But what they did was that then provided me an income, so I could almost like separate, the income that I was generating from the businesses, and then that's when it started to scale. It's almost like a compound effect.
And with stuff like that, like how much, I guess you said you've never done education in terms of knowing, like, did you feel like you structured things in the right way? And was you buying them for a company? Were you buying them in your own name?
Just bought them all in my own name. Obviously, it wasn't a problem back then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I bought the first two, I think they got valued up 113 and a half or something each. And I think they sold them to me for like, I can't remember now, 80s, 90 grand. So I had a really good deal.
Yeah.
And then they offered me free in another block. I bought those on bridging finance, held them for 6 months, refinanced out 6 months later, and basically had those free. Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's not much that can go wrong buying single lets sort of off plan. So, yeah, I suppose, but that's sort of the start of my journey in terms of property.
And then when did you decide to transition into the HMO model?
That's definitely been more recent. So my first HMO was so after buying single lets, started to, turn my hand to a bit of development. The first development was a house which we can convert to 2 flats. I think the HMO.
Whereabouts was the house you converted to 2 flats?
So that's all down, obviously, I'm Essex based, so down in the southeast. That was South End, so by the beach.
Yes, before we get onto the HMOs, let's talk about that then quickly. What was some of the issues or the good things that happened during that first, residential conversion?
What was the good?
Well, just the experience, the learning curve from doing it. Obviously, your first kind of more development style project.
Yeah, it was quite complex in terms of the build. We did like a single story rear extension. The plan was actually we retain the flats, we refinance. But in terms of the learnings, obviously it was much more hands-on then. I think I was down there, doing the clearance, just being general labour at that point. It went well. We made money on those when we sold them. But yeah, I suppose every development, you learn along the way, and obviously we're still learning on every one. You think, I never knew that. So
no, for sure. And I think that's why early on when you touched on, some advice you'd give people to always stay learning. And like my favorite thing is whenever I'm on site, particularly if it's a new type of project, I'm asking why to everything. Like, why are we doing it this way? Because if somebody can't justify it to you, how can you then justify it to anybody else and know what you're doing going forward?
Yeah, never assume you know everything. I constantly ask questions.
Yeah, I think, and you'll find that, for any of you guys that are currently like on site sweeping up and you're seeing Mitch driving around in his Lamborghini, just remember at one point he was there too, doing the sweeping up, being probably told what to do by the people he's paying because you don't know how to do the building works. You're just like, look, if I've got to carry the bags of plaster up the stairs to get the job done quicker, let me do that and just really understand.
There's actually an ongoing joke on site. I'm actually quite good with just a broom, just generally just keeping the site tidy.
No, that's me, because we know as well, as a developer standpoint, if the site's not tidy, that £400 mirror that we've just bought is a lot more likely to break when everything isn't in its right place.
Oh, absolutely. And if the trades are working within a messy site, you'll see that in the work.
Yeah.
So having a nice, clean, tidy site is really, really important.
And it creates accountability. Like, if your Sparky's there and he's just like, there's a load of sawdust everywhere, there's packaging from the flooring, he's going to be clipping away, leaving all of his remnants as well. So the site is, if you go into somebody's house and it's really, really tidy, first thing you do is shoes off. If you go into somebody's house and it's horrible, you're like, I'm going to leave my outside shoes on.
Yeah. No, to be honest, even like the build cleans at the end where they've not put any coverings down, they've painted the ceilings like little specks of like paint on your, trying to clean up. That was probably only a couple of years ago. I still got involved. Not so much now, but.
Yeah. But you transition, it's part of the process. Like it's paying your dues a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I think if you've never done it or never maintained those standards yourself, when you are taking on board a project manager, when you are telling other people what to do, if you haven't sort of walked the walk yourself, it's a lot more difficult, to build out those processes and really make sure you get it right. So obviously you started doing developments, learning curve there. Yeah. What was it about HMOs that attracted you? When did you start with them?
Yeah, so I did my first HMO. I bought a property, a pre-auction, 295. I think it was actually 2 flats at the time. So we had to convert it back to a C3 house. And then we had permit development rights, turned it into a C4 6-bed. Then we turned it into an 8-bed, got refused planning, went to appeal, finally got it. And then really, I did a few other developments after that. Did a house, which we actually did flip. We did another house to 2-flat conversions, which we sold. But then I just found myself going back to HMOs, and for the reason that, you know, I'm not into flipping properties. I want to build a portfolio, hence why we've sort of got to the portfolio size that we're currently at. So for me, when I look at all of the strategies, I think, right, well, if I'm going to build stuff and retain it, what is the best cash flowing asset? Generally, it's HMO. I mean, you might get slightly better yield with SA, but I don't want to run a hotel. So for me, just, you know, HMO was a sort of sweet spot between sort of like effort and return. When you look at, you know, you could buy, you know, have single lets like those house to 2-flat conversions. You know, you might get $2.5 grand gross rent for 2 flats, whereas a 7-bed HMO, which we do now, you know, that rent $6 grand a month. So it's easy from that side, sort of just to, you know, to focus on that.
And I think one thing that's important from that, and as a takeaway, is that it's understanding what you want. If you want to build a portfolio, if your focus is around yield, it's around like your monthly recurring revenue, then the HMO is going to give you that. But I think also focusing on specialization, like it's very easy to see someone doing commercial to residential conversion, someone doing residential conversion, someone doing new build, and feel like I want a piece of everything. But the people that I find are generally the most successful are the people that specialize and do one thing really, really well.
Yeah. I mean, you know, there is no best property strategy. It's just whatever is best for you. And I think that's like important. Like think about what you want from, you know, your investments, and then, like I say, niche down into it, become the expert. And I think we have definitely done that now. We've obviously got the co-living brand, Spaces Co-living. And I actually haven't done, I'm probably recognised most for high-end HMOs, but there's probably people out there that have done a lot more than what we have. You know, we'll probably get to 100 rooms later this year. But I think because we do it so well, that's probably where we've got some recognition, I guess.
What made you decide to go into the high-end HMO model, like with the professional tenant type, as opposed to maybe something like semi-independent living and other different types of sort of HMOs?
Because we're building the brand Spaces, which is sort of like a high-end co-living brand. And obviously, yeah, I suppose it's difficult because where we've got so many rooms now, we are actually starting to sort of diversify the tenant profile, because just simply, you know, I think there'll just be, you know, there's obviously tenant profiles to service in terms of like, you know, HA, etc. So, but again, it's probably from the management side. I mean, you know, a working professional high-end HMO is minimal management when you compare that to maybe like a social housing like contract or something.
Sure. So now we're going to give some like value back to the people that are looking at the HMO models and are really trying to understand things. So you've touched on a few things, but, you know, we want to kind of help other people understand. So you mentioned, for example, a few things like, so C3.
Yeah.
What does C3 mean?
So basically C3 is a use class, and that is essentially a single dwelling house.
Okay.
So if it's a house, it'll be C3.
And then C4?
So C4 is a 6-bed, up to a 6-bed HMO. So obviously, if you're operating outside of an Article 4 area, you'd have permit development rights.
And just for those that are not familiar, because we want to, you know, we want to cut through the jargon. What is Article 4 as well?
So Article 4 will be something that's brought in by a local council, and what that does is it essentially removes the permitted development right to turn a house from a C3 into any HMO. You have to go through the full planning route. But where we operate outside of an Article 4 area, obviously you can take a C3 residential house, convert that under permit development via a certificate of lawful use, and then that would then obviously be a 6-bed HMO. Obviously, if you're going to do above 6 beds, then it's obviously a full planning application, which would then be sui generis, which is obviously the next use class.
Question I had actually, and I think this is kind of something, a debate between developers and architects. Do you still do, so even when you're doing it under PD, do you still actually do full planning apps ever, or do you generally just leave it as basically the prior approval?
Yeah, so I mean, we've never done, we've always done more bedrooms than 6. Yeah, so we always, but the planning route for that is C3 to C4 via the certificate of lawful use. And then it's always the full planning application for the additional bedrooms. But again, yeah, if you're only doing a 6-bed, it makes sense to obviously, get the lawful development certificate, just to future-proof the site.
Yeah, no, for sure. So you now obviously transition fully into the HMO model, specializing. We touched on obviously some of the use classes. Let's kind of talk about the actual how you take, for example, 3-bed house and convert it into a 6-bed, maybe even an 8-bed. What do you generally do, and what changes do you make to these properties?
Yeah, so you probably hear me say a lot, like 7-bed on the existing footprint is our sweet spot. Probably, that our last 3 or 4 developments have all been 7-bed, and the reason for that I'll explain. But essentially, yeah, we're buying typically down in Southend and Westcliff, we're buying, it's probably a 4-bed house with 2 reception rooms. And they're always that 1900s large Victorian house, which is always much bigger in size than the sort of the 1950s post-war house, which they had to, reduce in size. And obviously just punch out the number. But typically go in the front door. Obviously, what would have been the lounge, bedroom 1, the dining area would have been bedroom 2. Large open plan kitchen, diner. Obviously, if we're doing 7-bed, the communal space needs to be 18 square meters. But then go upstairs, there would have five bedrooms up on the first floor, and generally you've got that large first floor front bedroom, which we can actually split into 2. So so we've been doing 7 beds. We have done larger 8 beds in the past, but obviously to achieve an 8-bed, you need to do a loft conversion. And what we found was our cost per room was increasing massively. It was also slowing us down. So we sort of analysed the numbers between sort of 6-bed, 7-bed, 8-bed with a loft, and then we've just found that 7-bed existing footprint, no extension, is sort of our sweet spot. And you can sort of find those houses where we are. They're generally like 1,400, 1,500. The one we just completed on, as I was coming up here, 375 grand, makes a 7-bed, no extension, and that's around about 1,600 square foot.
Good numbers. I think you sort of touched on, national size standards when you were talking about like the open plan kitchen, living room. Are there any like frustrations you find with that? Because for me personally, like, whilst there's the national standards, a lot of the time different councils have their own certain nuances and interpretations. What's it like in the areas that you operate?
Yeah, so obviously we've only operated within one borough.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I've not experienced that, but I say that to people in the academy, go and download your local council's guidance, because it can vary, but there's still stuff. We had 1 bedroom, which the main window, obviously it was a set of French doors that went out to the back garden, and that was obviously the window and the light and the ventilation. And they said, we can't license that room because it's a set of doors rather than a window, which is like a policy within Southend. So we had to change the French doors
to have a window on the top,
like a top opener window, which is light and ventilation. So it's just those little bits. You just have to learn what they're looking for. But
I think there is, and that's the thing about property. A lot of the time, there's so many different nuances. That's why it's really important to have the right people around you, whether it's the right architect or the right, local planning consultant that understands the local area. Does the area that you're operating, do they offer any sort of kind of commencement services where you can get, when you were starting out, like a planning officer to come out and actually look and make sure your plans meet what they want?
No, I mean, it all does come down to your power team. And actually, we've sort of revamped our power team more recently, probably only within the last 6 months, because we felt like, we could be doing things better. But really, it comes down to getting an architect on side that really does understand, HMO's minimum space requirements, because I've obviously had a few horror stories, where we've done an 8-bed, put it into planning, and literally, I think, obviously for an 8-bed, the community area's got to be 24 square meters. It's I think it was like 2 square meters short. So we went through the plan application twice, and it was never going to achieve it because it fell below minimum space requirements. So it does come down to your power team, good architect, good planning consultant. Obviously, we've got an in-house build team, so we're pretty much covered from that side, which is I would say, key to sort of our success. And then also getting a building control officer on side that communicates and understands what you're trying to do, because when you start doing larger HMOs, building control, just, it's, they're very uneasy, but that's just simply because there's a lack of guidance for large HMOs.
And that's the thing, I think, like sort of post Grenfell, that when people are looking at obviously fire safety, a lot of the stuff for larger developments starts to trickle down into the smaller projects that people are doing. So, like things that maybe wouldn't have been needed in the past, like them being fine with just interlinked smoke alarms. They're now saying, actually, we want a full panel system. We want like break glass near the entrance. It's really understanding what's going to be needed.
Yeah, and I think that's why it makes sense to get a really good power team who liaises with building control, who can push back sometimes on certain elements. But the problem is obviously there's loads of guidance up to a 6-bed HMO. There's loads of guidance for flats. And then you've got this grey area in between where, there's no guidance for large HMOs. So you can get one building control surveyor come out who would look at it, but perceive it more as flats, whereas you get someone come out that would look at it more as like a single dwelling. So I think that's probably been our biggest challenge in the last year is understanding what they want. And again, I think the regulation's sort of changing. It's constantly, increasing, isn't it, to provide safer housing, which does make sense. But I think it's just understanding that. So
like your roadmap, because I guess a lot of people, if we kind of take you through like the process of you basically finding something that you want to buy, all the way to the exit of having the asset stabilized with tenants in. So starting point, where do you find these deals? Because a lot of people are thinking, well, you're finding something, you're buying it for what, 300,000, and now you're getting £6,000 a month. Where are you finding the types of properties that you're buying generally?
I mean, obviously that's why we, push the profile. We've got good contacts locally where we operate. So a lot of stuff does come off market. The one that we've just completed on come off market. We've got that opportunity, but yeah, I guess we're buying them. We always do development finance, whereby they will fund the purchase and also the build cost. Obviously, we'll need to make up the shortfall in terms of the deposit, whether we do that with our own funds or whether we do that with some like private finance. But essentially, we've got our in-house build team. We generally work to 20 grand a bedroom. So if we're doing a 7-bed on an existing footprint, no extension, we'll spend 140 grand on that. So even though we're buying the house for 375, we still got to spend 140 grand on converting that. But really a 7-bed in that location, you'd probably generate circa, 67 grand a month. Our average room rent across the whole portfolio is about 825 per month, including bills. And then just refinance out, obviously, try and recoup as much of your original capital as possible, and then obviously just
for sure. So if we go into each, so generally you're kind of pushing that personal branding, the business brand, people understanding exactly, look, this is what Mitch does. You said like you use the same people, so they know you're going to deliver. When you're working with agents, they know that if they give you a deal, if you agree a price, you're going to get the business done. So that's how you get it across the line, and through obviously social media, through talking about exactly what you want, people know what to come to you with. So that's how you kind of find the deals in the first place. Once you found that, you're then generally using bridging finance with a development facility to fund the deals. Again, same thing, I'm guessing, like because of public profile, it's now a lot easier for you to either raise investor capital or put your own money in to make up the equity ticket element of the deal. Then now you've got a kind of really standardized process. So I'm guessing the next person you would employ, would that be your architect to give you like the plans of what you're going to do with the property, or where do you go after you've secured the deal?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, obviously, the size of the house, you can obviously, when you go to the viewing, you've got an idea. It is a bit of an art, measuring out the rooms with your laser to think, does this make a 7?
I love a laser.
Yeah. It is a bit of an art. So I already got a good understanding of what it makes. But so in between exchange, so probably prior to exchange, we would get the architect out and do floor plans. And then at that point, we'd probably instruct the planning consultant. And then generally now we're submitting our certificate of lawful use to go to the 6-bed prior to even completing on the property as well. And that just speeds up the whole planning process, because obviously if we're going to sui generis, we've got 2 plan applications. So if each one of those is 2 months, and also on your full plan application, which they love in Southend, putting you into committee, that 2 months is then 3 months. So, you've got 5 months for 2 plan applications. So,
for sure. And then you've got the benefit of obviously an in-house build team, but a lot of people are going to be using external builders for that process now, from obviously taking it on as a C3, getting into C4, then Sue Generous. What's like the process? So talk to me kind of step by step of from that family home, maybe it's not in the best condition, to getting it to an all singing, all dancing, luxury HMO. What do we start with first?
Strip out.
Strip out.
Strip
So
out.
demo.
Literally take it back to brick. Strip out. Remove the chimney breasts.
Do you ever try and save anything?
We sell the bricks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
We get some good money for the London stocks, but no, we just basically strip it out, end up with a shell, and then obviously we need to be fireboarding the existing ceilings, and then we basically form our internal walls. Obviously, first fix, plumbing, electrics. Yeah, and then just walk through the process. It is involved. There's lots of boarders. So if you look at our like ceiling makeup, because obviously you've got sound consideration and also fire. You know, we would like triple board.
Yeah, particularly like, you know, we said if you're buying Victorian properties, that a lot of the time the insulation was lucky. If you're lucky, a bit of newspaper.
Oh yeah. So the properties now we have to do 50mm Celotex insulation on all of the external walls. So we have to batten it 50mm overboard. Yes, there's a lot of work involved. But on our ceiling makeups, because obviously you need to have sound tests when you go to 7 beds and above. You know, we're fireboarding the existing ceilings to get that compartmentation.
You know, I didn't know that. You know,
Yeah.
I've never done a large HMO. I've just done maximum 6 beds. You got to do sound tests as well.
Yes, sound test when you go Sui Generis. Yeah, so
doing residential conversions. I hate sound testing.
Yeah, so we don't do the airflow test,
okay.
but yeah, we fireboard the existing ceilings, and then we take our internal walls up to that. So obviously you've got good compartmentation, and then we've got to do metal frame, backfill, double board. So there's a lot of work involved. You don't really see that once it's finished. There's so much work
that
behind.
Goes into prep. Okay, nice. Well, I think the upside of that is, and this is what's interesting, like when landlords get a bad rep, particularly HMO landlords. Like if you see in a paper, it's going to be like HMO landlords. It's like in people's heads, you're putting people in a chicken coop.
Yeah.
But the reality is, you know, it's way better from a health and safety perspective that your ceilings have now got 1 hour fire protection. All of your doors are going to be like have 1 hour fire protection.
Yeah.
You're going to have, you know, interlinked smoke alarms to make sure that if anything happens in the property, everybody is notified. Improved facilities in terms of kitchen and living space. We touched on the minimum size standards.
Yeah.
And obviously from a sound perspective. So realistically, and I think that's the thing that people don't see.
Yeah.
They hear HMO and think, oh, everybody living on top of each other. But particularly when you consider like whether it's London, whether it's like, you know, Greater London and the surrounding counties, the starting salary of like, you know, a nurse at the moment is what, 26, 27,000. Teachers starting salaries again are around the same. The reality of going to go and rent a 1-bedroom flat means you're just going to be, you know, just working to live. Like, you know, you're not going to actually have any lifestyle. Whereas a lot of people would say, look, I'd rather be around like-minded people, like-minded professionals, be able to actually have disposable income and enjoy life. So I think people like you that are creating like really nice HMOs actually providing, you know, a massive service to their local community.
Yeah, I suppose you could look at it one way or the other. I mean, we did actually have the local paper come out. They reached out to us. We've got a property which is an old ex C2 care home, which is just run down. We bought it vacant possession, and we've gone through planning to convert that to 11-bed HMO. The local paper said, can we come out? But we'd been in the paper a couple of weeks prior, because obviously all HMO applications, they call them bed sits, because they just obviously love the engagement when they call them bed sits. So we were in the paper a few weeks previously, and I said, look, he asked for comment. I said, I'm happy to comment on the article, but I want you actually to come out and see what we're actually trying to do. So we showed the local paper the sort of real poor condition care home, and then we took them to our sort of like flagship HMO, which we've just finished, and they were blown away. And they put an article out, and it was like really balanced, and they could see the benefit of that in the community. But again, obviously on the comments,
but listen,
people
the internet will always
agree,
win.
But I mean, I'm always of the opinion that, you know, if you consider say 10 houses that we've got, you know, we've got 74 bedrooms across those 10 houses. So in one sense, yes, I understand that you could say, well, yeah, that's loss of 10 family homes, but you've got to remember that these big 1,900 you know, they're poor standard, poor quality. People have got to spend hundreds of thousands on these houses to even get them to a standard to actually live in. And actually, when you consider, I would say, you know, they're actually underutilized as stock, because, you know, if we can take 10 houses and provide housing for 74 individuals, that would actually be a much better use of those properties than a family home. So
and also, like, birth rates are dropping. There's not as many large families, like, you know, where typically you would need 4 bedrooms plus 2 reception rooms.
Yeah.
You know, so it is about utilization. I think obviously everything is a balance.
Yeah.
If you look in an area and there's loads of, you know, there's loads of HMOs and no family homes, that's why they introduced Article 4. But at a point where you can see actually there is still reasonable stock of both family dwellings and, you know, relatively affordable high-end housing for working professionals, you're finding a good balance for what the economy actually needs.
I just think it's housing stock that is required. Yes, we also need a lot more family homes, granted, but, you know, if I didn't have those 10 houses, 74 bedrooms, you know, where are those people going?
Yeah.
And again, like you say, your birth rates are falling. You know, people decided to have kids a lot later. Another thing that we quite like is that there's obviously this like loneliness pandemic where people, you know, don't enjoy living on their own. So, you know, living with like-minded people, like you said, and, you know, foster that sense of community. I think it's like, you know, I think providing.
Yeah. No, the lonely pandemic is a real thing. You know, I only found out the other day, you know, like dating sites, like your online dating sites, I don't know, like which ones, but like they have a section just for making friends.
Really? Yeah.
Like, so people are really out here struggling to build those connections. So naturally,
which is strange in a world where we're probably more connected than ever.
But I think it's because it's a lot of fake connect, like, you know, online. Like we could follow each other for years and be mates online, see each other in the street and
ignore
like,
each other.
I'm not gonna say hello to him.
Yeah.
But like in the comment section, I'm like, my guy, he's the best.
Yeah.
So which is really interesting. I kind of want to touch on your co-living brand before I let you go as well, because it's something actually, I don't know if you know, but like, so I never did HMOs in terms of myself, but we had a rent-to-rent company where I think at its peak, we had like 51 houses under management, which was about 300 odd rooms.
Yeah.
And that was actually our long-term goal, was to basically help set up a co-living brand, because we saw the importance of, you know, if realistically you can create something where someone's like, you know what, over time, whether or not I move from Loughborough to London, if I know that, you know, sorry, the name of your brand again?
Spaces.
If I know that Spaces has a certain standard, I haven't even got a view, because I know what they provide. I know the standard they provide. And if you can grow and sort of be in multiple locations, people buy into the brand. What's your long-term vision for Spaces?
I don't know, but it's just something that we're going to continue with. I mean, Knight Frank put out a report the other day, and they were talking about how institutions are increasing their investment into co-living. And one of the things they focused on was actually like operational efficiencies. And if you can actually, you know, build a team around what you're doing with your co-living brand, then actually it becomes a lot more valuable. So I don't know. I mean, I don't have any intention of, you know, of selling the assets. It's just be something that we're going to grow over time. I'd like to branch out in different areas so it's a more nationwide recognised brand rather than more regional. But again, that'll take time. I mean, obviously, the goal was always to get to 100 rooms, and we'll get to that this year. That's £1 million rent roll just on the 100 bedrooms at the 825 a month. So wanted to get to that. We'll achieve that this year. And then people are like, so what are you going to do once you get to 100 rooms? I'm like, I'm not too sure. I think it's going to have to be like 250.
I got to add a zero. Got to add a zero, really. Yeah, 1,000 rooms.
Yeah, I think, you know, I don't see why not. It's just, you know, we're just going to continue doing what we're doing. We're in a bit of a, you know, we're in a good rhythm at the moment. So just see where it takes us.
And I think that's it. Look, business is always going to be changing. Market conditions are always going to be changing. But whilst it's there, while it's working, you just have to rinse and repeat.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, for young entrepreneurs, people watching this, you'll see the importance, and we touched on it earlier, but of just doing one thing really well, because it's going to open up other doors for you later down the line. Like if you've got a friend who's really good at, you know, for example, we speak about Omar, he's amazing at trading properties. That's his thing. If you want to do that, you're better off just saying, Omar, do you know what? Why don't you take some money? Do some trading for me. If you want to invest in HMOs, I know he does it as well, but for argument's sake, like, let me do a bit of that for you. And you can kind of trade with your friends?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, like I said, we're set up for it. We've got the in-house build team, got a load of comparable evidence. We're getting offered the deals. I have more recently set up a joint venture company with an investor on an equity basis. So we've got available capital now to really sort of push on.
To go.
Yeah.
So if people want to maybe work alongside you, if maybe people have deals for you, where's the best place to find and connect with you?
Yeah, so probably on Instagram. My handle's Mitch Nunn. I've got YouTube also, so Mitch Nunn Property. Yeah, so those places. I mean, if you're interested in working with me on and being part of the educational community that I've put together, which is the HMO Academy, that's going to be launching soon. So you can learn from my experience and obviously go off and do it yourself. That's the sort of plan.
Amazing. Well, we really appreciate having you on. That has been another episode of the PBK podcast. If you've liked it, if you've enjoyed it, don't turn this video off. Subscribe right now. Did you know only 49% of people that regularly watch our videos have subscribed? If you're one of those, make that change by that 0.1 of a percentage point and subscribe right now. Peace.